4. The myths of reason. In the latter 1930s, I audited a lecture by a scientist which became memorable for one reason. The man, rather gently but firmly, expressed dissent from all forms of rationalism. Reason, he held, judges reality by the mind of man, and the mind of man, with its trust in rationalism, places all kinds of limits on reality. He cited some examples from science. Thus, the law of non-contradiction would hold that two worlds, two sets of people in two different lecture halls, cannot exist in the same point in time and space. He stated, however, that given a slightly different atomic structure, this was entirely possible. He cited an English physicist, Jevons, as an authority for this. I checked out two works by Jevons from the library, but could not understand enough of him to confirm this point. What did make itself clear to me was that reason is limited by its own experience, whereas the universe is far vaster than the mind of man. Moreover, God's realm, which transcends man's narrow vision, is far greater than man's mind can comprehend. The rationalist limits understanding to reason. Faith is for him a blind belief, whereas the Bible tells us, quote, "Through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which do appear." End quote. Hebrews 11:3. Faith is thus a higher form of understanding, one which does not limit its perspective to the scope of man. The universe, let alone God's realm, is vaster than the mind of man can comprehend. Reason is a valid perspective if it is not totalitarian. Reason now admits the facts of science, but it is hostile to the facts of faith. Rationalism, thus, is a form of self-imposed blindness of a most arrogant sort. It says, in effect, there are no fish unless my net catches them. The presupposition of rationalism is the autonomy and intimacy of reason. If the rationalist talks of faith, it is about things which he still cannot understand, but which seem a logical extension of his rationally accepted views about reality. Faith is not a belief in what is incomprehensible to man, but a God-given understanding. Faith, like grace, is the gift of God, not a natural asset. Ephesians 2:8. This kind of understanding is alien to rationalism because it is a theological, not a natural fact. As Van Til observed, quote, "When Paul preached Christ at Athens, he identified him in terms of authority alone." End quote. The rationalist wants to establish authority rather than recognize it. To begin with a biblical perspective means to recognize the radical impact of sin and its world and life view on man. For the faithful Christian, the mind and life of man must be governed by the Word of God. Both church and state must be under the authority of the Word of God, and also man, his reason, and every area of life and thought. The knowledge of God is inescapable knowledge, because man is created in the image of God, Genesis 1:26-28. He can neither avoid nor escape the knowledge of God, however much he strives to hold it back, Romans 1:18-22. That knowledge thunders in all his being, and his suppression of that knowledge is the most ugly fact about sinful man. As Van Til stated it, quote, "God has never left himself without a witness to men. He witnessed to them through every fact of the universe from the beginning of time. No rational creature can escape this witness. It is the witness of the triune God whose face is before men everywhere and all the time. Even the lost in the hereafter cannot escape this witness. God has made man a rational, moral creature. He will always be that. He exists in the relationship of covenant interaction. He is a covenant being. To not know God, man would have to destroy himself. He cannot do this. There is no non-being into which man can slip in order to escape God's face and voice. The mountains will not cover him. Hades will not hide him. Nothing can prevent his being confronted, quote, with him with whom we have to do, end quote. Whenever he sees himself confronted with God. Whatever may happen, whatever sin may bring about, whatever havoc it may occasion, it cannot destroy man's knowledge of God and his sense of responsibility to God. Sin would not be sin except for this ineradicable knowledge of God. Even sin as a process of ever-increasing alienation from God presupposes for its background this knowledge of God, end quote. When puny and sinful man declares that he will define reality by his logic, he is usurping from God the right of definition. God the Creator is thereby God the Definer, and attempts at independent definitions are usurpations of the prerogatives of God. To begin with Aristotle's logic as our premise of definition is to end up with Aristotle's meager God, a first principle, a limiting concept used to prevent an eternal regress and to allow for a starting point. But Aristotle's God is more dead than Aristotle. He was never alive. He is a very safe and non-threatening God, obviously much preferred by sinners. On the other hand, we are always confronted by the living God of the Bible. Myths of reason are attempts to evade God the Lord, the eternal King,